A poor mechanic repairs a cheap truck, thinking it's just another job. But the woman who owns it? She's secretly a billionaire on the run, hiding from betrayal, power, and a life she no longer trusts. As they grow closer, she starts to feel something real, until the truth comes out. The man who gave her a second chance now believes she's been playing him all along. Was it all a lie? Or will love prove stronger than the secrets between them? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. Jack Rossi wiped his greasy hands on a rag that had seen better days and squinted at the clock on the garage wall. Almost 9. Another late night trying to keep his father's dream alive. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the concrete floor littered with tools and parts. "Just one more," he muttered, sliding back under Mrs. Peterson's ancient Buick. The carburetor rebuild could wait until morning, but the elderly widow needed her car for a doctor's appointment. Jack's father had always said, "We fix cars, but we serve people." Those words echoed in his mind as his calloused fingers worked methodically. A loud clanking sound followed by a sputtering engine interrupted his concentration. The noise grew louder, then died with a pathetic wheeze right outside the garage. Jack rolled out from under the Buick and stood, stretching his aching back. Through the open bay door, he spotted a battered red pickup truck, its hood releasing a thin plume of steam into the night air. The driver's door creaked open, and a woman stepped out, her silhouette backlit by the garage lights. "Hello?" she called, her voice carrying a note of frustration. "I'm really hoping you're still open." Jack grabbed a clean shop towel. "Technically closed, but I'm still here." As she approached, the light revealed her face, striking green eyes, honey blonde hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, and a camera hanging around her neck. Despite her casual clothes, worn jeans, and a simple t-shirt, there was something refined about her that seemed at odds with the beat-up truck. "You have no idea how grateful I am," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Lena Harmon." Her handshake was firm, her smile genuine but cautious. Jack noticed a smudge of dirt on her cheek that she seemed unaware of. "Jack Rossi. This is my garage." Pride and worry tangled in those simple words. "What happened to your truck?" "I was driving through town when it started making this terrible knocking sound. Then steam, shuddering, and..." She gestured helplessly toward the vehicle. "Complete surrender." Jack nodded and walked toward the truck. "Mind if I take a look?" "Please, I'm on a bit of a tight budget, though." She bit her lower lip. "I'm a photographer, traveling cross-country to capture authentic America. Small towns, real people, honest work." Jack raised an eyebrow as he popped the hood. The engine was a mess, neglected and patched together with what looked like desperation and duct tape. He leaned in, checking hoses and connections. "Blown head gasket, from the looks of it. Coolant's mixing with your oil." He straightened up. "Not a quick fix. Parts, labor. Probably looking at $700 minimum." Lena's face fell. "That's more than I was hoping for." "I can give you a firm estimate in the morning after a proper inspection." Jack closed the hood. "Where are you staying tonight?" "I hadn't gotten that far in my planning," she admitted. "Any recommendations that won't destroy what's left of my budget?" Jack thought for a moment. "Mabel's boarding house is decent and fair priced. It's about a half-mile up the road. I can give you a ride." "That would be amazing. Let me grab my bag." 20 minutes later, after dropping her bags at Mabel's, they found themselves walking back toward the garage. Lena had insisted on stretching her legs after hours of driving, and Jack found himself pointing out local landmarks in the small town. "It's so clear here," Lena said, looking up at the night sky. "In the city, you can barely see any stars." Jack followed her gaze upward. My dad taught me all the constellations when I was a kid. See that one? He pointed. That's Cassiopeia, the queen who boasted about her beauty. Show me more, she said, her voice soft in the quiet night. Jack pointed out Ursa Major, Orion, and the North Star, recounting the stories his father had told him years ago. Standing there under the vast canopy of stars, he was acutely aware of her presence beside him, their shoulders nearly touching. 3 days earlier, in a gleaming high-rise office, Eleanor Harmon's world had shattered. Ms. Harmon, I found these while organizing the quarterly reports, her assistant had whispered, sliding a folder across the desk. The documents inside revealed a carefully orchestrated plan, board meeting minutes, emails, financial projections, all pointing to one horrifying conclusion. Her fiancé, Victor Caldwell, along with key board members, was positioning to seize control of Harmon Technologies. Victor suggested the new voting structure would protect your interests, one email read. Once implemented, we can move forward with restructuring leadership. Eleanor's hands trembled as she found Victor's signature on documents she'd never seen, authorizing changes that would dilute her family's controlling interest in the company her parents had built. That night, she'd packed a bag, withdrawn cash from accounts Victor couldn't trace, purchased the used truck from a lot outside the city, and driven away from her suffocating life, seeking space to think, to plan, to breathe. Now, standing beside a mechanic named Jack Rossi in a town she'd never heard of until today, Lena, felt something she hadn't experienced in years. The simple pleasure of an honest conversation with someone who wanted nothing from her but her company. Jack spent the morning thoroughly examining Lena's truck, methodically checking each component. The more he looked, the deeper his frown grew. Rust had eaten through critical areas of the frame, the transmission showed signs of imminent failure, and the electrical system had been jury-rigged in ways that made him wince. When he slid out from underneath the vehicle, his expression was grim. Lena stood nearby, fidgeting with her camera strap. That bad, huh? Worse than I thought. Jack wiped his hands on a shop rag. The head gasket is just the beginning. Your frame has structural damage, transmissions on its last legs, and whoever worked on your electrical system should be banned from touching vehicles. He shook his head. This is weeks of work, not days. Weeks? Lena's eyes widened, but Jack noticed something curious. A flash of what almost looked like relief before concern took over. I can't afford to be stranded that long. I understand. There's a rental place in the next town over. No, she said quickly. I mean, my budget is already stretched thin. Rental cars are expensive. Jack leaned against the workbench. What if you stayed? Riverside isn't exactly a tourist destination, but there's worse places to take photographs of authentic America. He made air quotes around the phrase. Is there somewhere I could stay? Mabel's is lovely, but actually, Mrs. Chen has a small cottage behind her house she rents out sometimes. It's nothing fancy, but it's private and affordable. Lena tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. That sounds perfect. And for getting around. Jack hesitated, then added, I have my dad's old bicycle. It's yours to borrow while you're here. You'd do that for a complete stranger? Jack shrugged. That's how things work around here. By evening, Lena was settled in the cottage, a snug one-bedroom with weathered charm and a small porch overlooking a garden. Jack had helped her move in and now stood awkwardly at the door. There's a decent diner down on Main Street if you're hungry, he said. I was heading there myself. Is that an invitation? Lena asked with a small smile. I guess it is. The Riverside Diner buzzed with evening customers. Jack nodded to several people as they found a booth by the window. You know everyone here, Lena observed. Most of them. My dad's garage has been around for 30 years. You fix enough cars, you get to know the whole town. After they ordered, Lena asked, Is that what you always wanted? To take over your father's business? Jack stared into his coffee. I had other plans once, engineering school. But Dad got sick, and the garage needed someone. He shrugged. Family comes first. I understand that pressure, Lena said quietly. My parents had very specific expectations for my future, too. Photography wasn't on their approved list. Not exactly. She smiled wryly. They wanted me to follow a more traditional path. But you broke free. Did I? Her voice carried an edge that surprised them both. Sometimes I feel like I'm still trying to live up to what they wanted, just in a different way. Jack nodded slowly. I get that. Some days I wonder if I'm running my father's garage or if it's running me. Their eyes met across the table, a moment of genuine understanding passing between them. To family expectations, Jack said, raising his coffee mug. Lena clinked her glass against it. And finding our own way? Across the diner, Darryl Fletcher watched them from a corner booth. His expensive shirt strained against his broad chest as he leaned forward, eyes narrowed. He pulled out his phone and dialed. It's me, he said quietly. Rossi's looking pretty cozy with some out-of-towner. Might be time to accelerate our plan for that property. He listened for a moment. Trust me, Victor, once we squeeze him on those taxes, he'll have no choice but to sell. Fletcher ended the call, his gaze lingering on Jack and Lena as they laughed together, oblivious to his presence. The next morning, Lena arrived at the garage earlier than expected. Jack looked up from an engine, surprised to see her standing in the doorway with 2 coffee cups. Thought you might need this, she said, offering him one. The lady at the coffee shop said you take it black. Thanks. Jack accepted the cup, their fingers brushing briefly. The small contact sent an unexpected warmth through his hand. What brings you by so early? Lena glanced around the cluttered office space visible through the door. I was thinking, while I'm stuck here waiting for my truck, maybe I could help around the garage. I noticed your filing system is a bit non-existent. Jack laughed. I was going to say vintage. Her eyes twinkled. I'm good with organizational systems. Jack raised an eyebrow. Photography and filing? Interesting combination. I've worked some office jobs between photography gigs, she said, the lie coming easier than it should have. Consider it payment for the bicycle loan. By the end of the week, Jack barely recognized his office. Lena had created a color-coded filing system, reorganized his supply ordering, and implemented a digital appointment calendar that automatically sent reminders to customers. How did you learn all this? Jack asked, watching her fingers fly across his ancient computer keyboard. My father believed in understanding how businesses work from the ground up, she said, which wasn't entirely untrue. Her father had indeed insisted she work in every department of Harman Technologies before taking a leadership role. Well, you've saved me hours of paperwork already. Jack leaned against the doorframe. Want to learn something hands-on in return? Lena looked up. Like what? Basic car maintenance. Everyone should know how to change their oil or fix a flat. Under the hood of a sedan, Jack guided Lena's hands through the process of changing spark plugs. He stood close behind her, his chest occasionally brushing against her back as he reached around to demonstrate. You need to feel it thread properly, he said, his breath warm against her ear as his hand covered hers on the wrench. Not too tight or you'll strip it. Lena was acutely aware of his proximity, the clean scent of his soap mingling with the garage's smell of oil and metal. Her heart raced, and it had nothing to do with the mechanical task at hand. Like this? She asked, her voice slightly unsteady. Perfect, he murmured. You're a natural. Their eyes met in the reflection of the car's polished engine cover. For a moment, neither moved away. Dark clouds gathered late one afternoon as Lena was helping Jack close up the garage. The first fat raindrops hit the pavement just as they were locking the office door. We'll never make it to our cars before it hits, Jack said as lightning flashed in the distance. Better wait it out inside. They retreated to the small break room. Jack found an old electric kettle and made them both tea as rain hammered against the metal roof. My dad used to say storms like this were good for business, Jack said, settling into a worn chair. People drive through puddles they shouldn't. Water gets where it shouldn't be, and they end up needing a mechanic. Tell me more about him, Lena said, cradling her mug. Jack's expression softened. He came here with nothing but his tools and a dream, built this place customer by customer. He gestured around them. He knew everyone's names, their kids' names, what they did for a living. This garage was more than a business. It was a community center. You're carrying on that legacy, Lena observed. Trying to... Jack's eyes met hers. What about your family? Lena hesitated, choosing her words carefully. My parents built something important too. They had high expectations but taught me the value of hard work. She looked down. They passed away a few years ago. I'm sorry, Jack said, briefly touching her hand. They left me with responsibilities I'm still figuring out how to handle. The rain continued to pour as they shared stories. Jack's unfiltered and genuine. Lena's carefully edited but increasingly honest in emotion, if not in detail. The guilt of her deception grew alongside her attraction to him. Later that night, in the quiet of her cottage, Lena finally checked her phone. 27 missed calls and dozens of messages from her assistant, Margot. Board meeting emergency. Victor pushing for vote of no confidence. Legal needs authorization for countermeasures ASAP. Where are you? The company is in crisis. Lena's thumb hovered over the call button, but instead, she found herself scrolling to her photo gallery. There, amid the carefully composed, authentic America shots she'd been taking as cover, was a candid picture of Jack she'd snapped while he worked, his face focused in concentration, hands steady and sure on a piece of machinery. She set the phone down without returning the calls, her company's mounting crisis momentarily less compelling than the memory of Jack's hands guiding hers earlier that day. The morning sun streamed through the garage's windows as Jack finished checking inventory. His phone rang, interrupting the peaceful routine. Jack's auto repair, he answered, wedging the phone between his ear and shoulder. Lena watched his expression shift from professional to concerned as he listened. Mrs. Winters, slow down. What's happening with the car? Jack's voice softened. Your husband's in the hospital? Don't worry about a thing. I'll be right there. He hung up and grabbed his toolbox. Emergency house call. Mrs. Winters' car won't start, and she needs to get to the hospital. Her husband had a heart attack yesterday. Can I come? Lena asked, surprising herself with how quickly she volunteered. Jack hesitated only briefly. Sure, could use an extra pair of hands. Mrs. Winters was a tiny woman with silver hair and worried eyes. She wrung her hands on her front porch as Jack examined her ancient Buick in the driveway. George has never spent a night in the hospital without me there, she explained to Lena. 62 years of marriage, and I've never let him wake up alone. Jack emerged from under the hood. Alternator shot, Mrs. Winters, but I've got a refurbished one in the truck that'll work for now. Oh, Jack, thank you. I don't know what I'd do without you. The woman's eyes welled with tears. Your father would be so proud. Lena helped by holding tools and passing parts as Jack worked with focused efficiency. Within an hour, the car rumbled to life. There you go, Mrs. Winters. Good as new. Jack wiped his hands on a rag. You get to George now. Tell him I expect him at poker night next month. Mrs. Winters fumbled with her purse. What do I owe you, dear? Jack gently closed her purse. This one's on the house. Dad's rule, family emergencies are always free. But the part is already paid for by all those cookies you've brought to the garage over the years. Jack smiled warmly. Now go on. George is waiting. As the Buick pulled away, Lena stared at Jack. In her world, nothing was free. Every service, every favor came with expectations attached. "You just gave away a $100 part and an hour of labor," she said. Jack shrugged. "The Winters have lived in this town for 70 years. They brought food for weeks after Dad died. Some things matter more than money." Later, Jack surprised Lena by suggesting they take lunch to Overlook Point. "Best view in the county," he promised. The spot lived up to its name. From the grassy hillside, the entire town spread below them, the main street, the neighborhoods, and Jack's garage, looking tiny from this height. "My dad used to bring me here when I was frustrated about something," Jack said, unpacking sandwiches from a cooler. "He'd point out all the houses of people we'd helped. Said that was our real wealth." Lena thought of her corner office with its view of skyscrapers and nothing else. "My father talked about wealth differently." "How so?" "Market share, quarterly earnings." She looked out at the town. Nothing you could actually see from a hillside. Jack stretched back on the blanket. "Don't get me wrong, money matters. But Dad always said a person's value isn't in their bank account, but in how many people would help them move a couch." Lena laughed. "What?" "It's his measure of real wealth. How many people would drop everything to help you when you needed?" Jack turned to face her. "By that measure, Mrs. Winters is a millionaire." The sunlight caught in his eyes, turning them amber. Lena found herself leaning toward him, drawn by something more powerful than attraction, something that felt like truth. Jack moved closer, his hand gently touching her cheek. Their lips were inches apart when his phone buzzed loudly between them. He pulled back with reluctance, checking the screen. His expression darkened. "Everything okay?" Lena asked. "Just a reminder from the bank." He pocketed the phone, the moment broken. Back at the garage, Jack's earlier lightness had vanished. Lena found him in the office, staring at a stack of papers. "Want to talk about it?" she asked. He hesitated before sliding a bank statement toward her. "Dad took out loans to expand the garage before he got sick. The treatments ate through our savings, and now..." He gestured helplessly at the numbers. "How much do you owe?" "Too much." Jack ran a hand through his hair. "I've been making minimum payments, but it's not enough. If I can't catch up soon, I might lose this place." The garage that was more than a business, the legacy his father had built. Lena felt a knot form in her stomach. 500 miles away, Victor Caldwell ended a phone call with a satisfied smile. He turned to his associate, a sharp-dressed man with cold eyes. "We've confirmed Eleanor's location, some backwater town with one stoplight." He slid a folder across his desk. "Bring her back, quietly. The board votes next week, and I need her signature on these documents, willingly or otherwise." The man nodded, taking the folder. "And if there are complications?" Victor's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Handle them." The next morning, the sharp slam of a car door outside the garage made Jack look up from the engine he was rebuilding. Through the open bay door, he spotted a gleaming black SUV and felt his stomach tighten. Darryl Fletcher, in an expensive suit that seemed out of place among the oil stains and tool cabinets, strode into the garage like he already owned it. "Jack, good to see you're hard at work." Darryl's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Mind if we talk business for a minute?" Jack wiped his hands on a rag. "I'm busy, Fletcher. This won't take long." Darryl pulled an envelope from his jacket. "I thought you'd want to know about a change in your financial situation." From the office doorway, Lena watched the exchange, immediately sensing the tension in Jack's shoulders. Darryl spread papers across the hood of a nearby car. "I've purchased your outstanding loans from Riverdale Bank. As of yesterday, you owe me, not them." Jack's face paled. "You can't do that." "Actually, I can. And I did." Darryl tapped the document. "Banks sell debt all the time. I just made them an offer they couldn't refuse." "Why would you..." Because I'm expanding, Jack. Fletcher Auto Group needs a waterfront location, and your daddy's little shop is sitting on prime real estate. Daryl's voice hardened. I need payment in full by the end of the month, or I'll start foreclosure proceedings. Jack stared at the numbers. This is impossible. You know that. That's business. Daryl straightened his tie. Nothing personal. Lena stepped forward, her fingers instinctively reaching for the phone in her pocket. One call to her financial team could resolve this instantly. The words, "I can help," formed on her lips before she caught herself. Revealing her true identity now would destroy everything. Instead, she cleared her throat. Excuse me, but have you considered the legal implications of predatory loan acquisition? There are regulations against targeting distressed businesses specifically to force foreclosure. Both men turned to her in surprise. And who might you be? Daryl asked, eyes narrowing. A friend with some business knowledge, Lena replied coolly. I also know that accelerated payment demands without reasonable notice can be contested in court, especially when the original loan terms are altered without good faith negotiation. Daryl's smile faltered. You got yourself a lawyer girlfriend, Jack. Just someone who can read, Lena countered. And who knows that community-based businesses have protection options through several small business advocacy groups. Groups that love publicizing cases of predatory acquisition attempts. Jack stared at her with newfound appreciation. Daryl gathered his papers. You've got until the end of the month. We'll see how much your business knowledge helps when the deadline comes. He stalked out, slamming the door behind him. Jack exhaled slowly. Where did that come from? Lena shrugged. I read a lot, and I hate bullies. That was... Jack searched for words. Amazing, but he's right about one thing. Knowing our rights doesn't create money out of thin air. There are options we haven't explored yet, Lena said. Community investment funds, business restructuring. Let me help you figure this out. Jack studied her face. Why do I get the feeling there's a lot more to you than taking photographs? Everyone has hidden depths, she replied with a small smile. Speaking of which, what are you doing tonight? That night, the annual Harbor Festival transformed the waterfront into a wonderland of lights and music. Local vendors lined the boardwalk, and a band played on a small stage near the water. Jack and Lena walked among the crowds, their earlier stress temporarily forgotten. This is beautiful, Lena said, looking at the string lights reflecting in the harbor water. Jack bought them cotton candy to share. Festival's been happening since before I was born. Dad used to let me ride on his shoulders to see the boats. As the band shifted to a slower song, couples moved to the wooden dance floor set up near the stage. Jack hesitated, then offered his hand. Would you like to dance? Lena took it, surprised by her own nervousness. I should warn you, I'm better at spreadsheets than dancing. Just follow my lead, he said, guiding her to the floor. His hand rested lightly on her waist as they swayed to the music. Lena had danced at charity galas and corporate events, but never like this. Never with someone who looked at her as if she were the only person in the world. Thank you for earlier, Jack said softly. With Daryl. I barely did anything. You stood up for me. Not many people would. As the song ended, Jack led her away from the crowd toward a quiet section of the harbor. The festival lights twinkled in the distance, and the water lapped gently against the wooden pilings. Lena, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I know you're only passing through, but these past few days... She placed her hand on his chest, feeling his heartbeat. I know. When he kissed her, Lena forgot about being Eleanor Harmon. Forgot about Victor and the company and the responsibilities waiting for her. For this moment, she was simply Lena, standing on a moonlit harbor with a man who saw her, truly saw her, for the first time in her life. Across town, in an upscale hotel suite, Victor Caldwell swirled a glass of scotch as Daryl Fletcher helped himself to the minibar. The mechanic won't sell willingly, Daryl reported, but the financial pressure should force his hand. Excellent. Victor opened his laptop, displaying a rendering of a sleek glass building. Harmon Technologies' new coastal research facility will transform this backwater. The board is already on board. They just don't know it yet. And the property is the perfect location. Victor zoomed in on the map. Deep water access, existing industrial zoning. Once we acquire your properties in the Rossi Garage, we'll control the entire waterfront. Daryl raised his glass. To profitable partnerships. Victor's smile was cold. Indeed. And to removing any obstacles in our way. As the early morning sun streamed through the window of Lena's cottage, Jack traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. They had been inseparable since the festival 3 nights ago, and today Jack had something special planned. "There's a place I want to show you," he said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Pack a swimsuit and something warm for later." "Mysterious," Lena smiled, stretching languidly. "Should I bring my camera?" "Definitely. It's the kind of place you'll want to remember." 2 hours later, Jack led Lena down a narrow trail through coastal woods. The path was barely visible, overgrown with summer vegetation. "How much farther?" Lena asked, ducking under a branch. "Just around this bend," Jack said. "My dad showed me this place when I was 10. Said it was our secret." They emerged from the trees onto a perfect crescent of sand, enclosed by rocky outcroppings that sheltered it from view. The small cove was completely deserted, waves lapping gently at the shore. "Jack," Lena breathed, "it's beautiful. Worth the hike?" She nodded, slipping off her backpack. "I've been to beaches all over the world, but this feels special." They spread their blanket on the warm sand. Jack watched as Lena took photographs of the cove, her face lit with genuine joy. Something had shifted between them since the night of the festival, a deepening connection that both thrilled and terrified him. After lunch, they waded into the water. Lena shrieked at the cold, but soon they were swimming in the sheltered bay, splashing each other like children. Jack caught her around the waist, spinning her in the water. "I haven't felt this free in years," she admitted, her arms draped around his neck. Later, as the sun began its descent, they walked along the water's edge. Their conversation turned to dreams, the kind rarely spoken aloud. "If money wasn't an issue," Jack said, "I'd transform the garage. My dad was old school, but I've been researching hybrid and electric car maintenance. With the right equipment, we could specialize in sustainable vehicle repair." "That's brilliant," Lena said. "The industry is heading that way. What about you? What would you do if you could do anything?" Lena was quiet for a moment. "I'd create technology that actually helps people, not just makes money. Affordable medical devices, communication systems for underserved communities." She looked out at the horizon. "My parents believed business could be ethical and profitable. I've always wanted to prove them right." Jack squeezed her hand. "That doesn't sound like a photographer's dream." "Maybe I'm more complicated than you thought," she said softly. "I'm counting on it," he replied. The sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks as they sat wrapped in a blanket on the rocks. Jack's arm was warm around Lena's shoulders, her head nestled against his chest. "I could stay here forever," she whispered. The drive back to Lena's cottage was quiet, filled with anticipation. Inside, they moved together with newfound familiarity, clothes discarded as they made their way to the bedroom. Their lovemaking was both tender and urgent, a physical manifestation of the connection growing between them. Afterward, Lena fell asleep with her head on Jack's chest, her breathing deep and even. He watched her sleep, wondering how someone who had entered his life so suddenly could feel so essential. Morning light filtered through the curtains when Jack slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Lena. He padded to the kitchen to make coffee, noticing a package by the door. likely delivered the previous day while they were gone. The label was addressed to "Current Resident," probably meant for the cottage's owner. As Jack moved it aside, a magazine slipped partially out of the torn packaging. He was about to tuck it back in when a familiar face on the cover caught his eye. It was Lena. Jack froze, then carefully pulled out the business magazine. The headline read, "Where is Eleanor Harmon? Tech Empire in Turmoil as CEO Disappears." Below was a professional photograph of Lena, or rather Eleanor Harmon, in an elegant business suit, her hair styled differently, but her face unmistakable. Jack sank into a kitchen chair, coffee forgotten, as his world tilted on its axis. The woman sleeping in the next room, the woman he was falling in love with, wasn't a traveling photographer named Lena. She was Eleanor Harmon, CEO of Harmon Technologies, one of the wealthiest women in the country, and she had lied about everything. Jack stared at the magazine, his hands trembling. The woman in the photograph was unmistakably Lena, Eleanor Harmon, looking polished and powerful in her corporate attire. The woman he'd been falling for was actually a billionaire CEO. A sick feeling spread through his stomach as connections began forming in his mind. The timing of her arrival, Daryl's sudden pressure, Victor's plans for waterfront development. When Lena walked into the kitchen, hair tousled from sleep and wearing his t-shirt, her smile faded instantly at the sight of the magazine in his hands. "Jack," she whispered, color draining from her face. "I can explain." He held up the magazine. Eleanor Harmon, Chief Executive Officer of Harmon Technologies. His voice was dangerously quiet. Was any of it real, or was this all just a game to you? "Jack, please. The truck breaking down right outside my garage. What a coincidence." Anger surged through him as he stood, throwing the magazine onto the table. Or was that planned too? Get close to the stubborn local mechanic so your company can build on my property. Lena reached for him, but he stepped back. "No, Jack, that's not what happened. I didn't know anything about Victor's plans for the waterfront." "Victor?" Jack's eyes narrowed. "The same Victor who's working with Daryl Fletcher, your business partner?" "My ex-fiancé," Lena said desperately. "I ran away because I discovered he was trying to take control of my company. I knew nothing about any plans involving your garage, I swear." Jack laughed bitterly. "Right. The billionaire CEO just happened to break down at the exact garage her company wants to demolish." "I'm telling you the truth." Tears filled Lena's eyes. "What we have is real. What I feel for you is real." "What exactly do we have, Eleanor?" Jack's voice cracked. "A rich girl slumming it with the local mechanic, getting your hands dirty for the authentic experience before heading back to your real life?" Lena flinched as if he'd struck her. "Is that what you think of me, after everything we've shared?" "I don't know what to think anymore." Jack ran a hand through his hair. "I trusted you. I let you into my life, my father's garage." "And I helped you," Lena cried. "I care about you, about the garage, about everything it stands for." "Then why lie? Why pretend to be someone you're not?" "Because people only see my money." Lena's composure finally broke. "They never see me. Victor only wanted my company. The board only wants profit. I just wanted someone to see me for who I really am." "But I never knew who you really were," Jack said quietly. "That's the problem." The hurt in his eyes cut Lena deeper than his words. She'd spent her life surrounded by people who wanted something from her, and now she'd become exactly what she despised. Someone who used deception to get close to another person. "Jack, please," she tried one last time. "Victor is behind this. He must have discovered where I was and set this up to destroy both of us." "Save it." Jack grabbed his jacket. "People like you have been looking down on people like me my whole life, thinking you can buy and sell us. My father taught me better than to fall for it." "That's not fair," Lena said, tears streaming down her face. "What I feel for you is real." "Nothing about you is real," Jack said, heading for the door. "Go back to your empire, Eleanor. We're done." The door slammed behind him, leaving Lena standing alone in the cottage kitchen, the magazine mocking her from the table. After allowing herself 5 minutes to cry, Lena wiped her tears and reached for her phone. If Victor was behind this, she needed proof. She might have lost Jack, but she wouldn't let Victor destroy what mattered to him. When Jack returned to the garage, his heart still raw from the confrontation, he found Daryl Fletcher supervising men unloading equipment from trucks. "What the hell is this?" Jack demanded. Daryl smiled, patting a piece of paper in his pocket. "Just getting a head start. According to these loan documents, you're in default. We'll be breaking ground on the new facility by the end of the week." "You can't do this," Jack said, watching in horror as workers began taking measurements around his father's garage. "Already am," Daryl replied. "Your girlfriend's company has big plans for this waterfront, and I'm getting my cut. Nothing personal, Rossi, just business." Jack stood frozen, watching as his world crumbled around him, wondering if anything Lena had told him was true after all. Lena stared at the gleaming Harmon Technologies building, its glass facade reflecting the afternoon sun. 3 days ago, she'd been in Jack's arms. Now she stood alone, her heart shattered but her resolve hardened. She straightened her blazer and strode through the revolving doors, ignoring the shocked expressions of employees who hadn't seen their CEO in weeks. "Ms. Harmon?" Her assistant Marcus rushed toward her, eyes wide. "We've been trying to reach you for—" "Call an emergency board meeting, now." Lena's voice was steel. "And get me everything on the waterfront development project in Oakport Harbor." Within an hour, Lena sat at the head of the conference table, facing the startled faces of her board members. Victor's chair remained conspicuously empty. "I understand decisions have been made in my absence," she said, sliding photographs of Jack's garage across the table. "Decisions I never approved." Board member Philip Edwards cleared his throat. "The Oakport Harbor project has been in development for months. Victor assured us you were fully informed." Victor lied. Lena placed documentation on the table showing the dates when the project had been initiated. "This plan was developed without my knowledge, using company resources for personal gain. The acquisition methods are predatory and illegal." Murmurs rippled through the room as board members exchanged nervous glances. "Where is Victor?" demanded Regina Torres, the most senior board member. "Excellent question." Lena's eyes narrowed. "He's currently in Oakport Harbor, working with a local businessman to force out established community businesses through loan manipulation and intimidation." The boardroom erupted in chaos. Some defended Victor, others expressed outrage. Lena let them argue, watching carefully to see who sided where. When the noise died down, she stood. "I'm resuming full control, effective immediately. The Oakport project is suspended pending investigation." She gathered her files. "That will be all." As the board members filed out, Lena headed to her office, where Marcus had assembled all documents related to the waterfront development. She was deep in research when her office door opened. "I thought you'd still be playing mechanic's girlfriend," Victor said, closing the door behind him. Lena didn't look up. "You're fired, Victor. Security will escort you out." He laughed, moving closer. "That's not how this works. The board's already signed off on the development. Your signature isn't required." "Forging corporate documents is a felony," Lena replied, finally meeting his gaze. "So is fraud, coercion, and misappropriation of company assets." Victor's charm vanished. "You have no proof." "Don't I?" Lena held up a flash drive. "Everything's here. The fake loan documents used to pressure Jack Rossi, the backdated board approvals, the shell companies you created to funnel money through Daryl Fletcher." Victor lunged for the drive, but Lena stepped back. "It's over, Victor. Get out before I call security." His face contorted with rage. "You stupid. You think you can just walk back in here after abandoning your responsibilities? For what? Some grease monkey in his pathetic garage. That grease monkey has more integrity in his oil-stained hands than you'll ever have, Lena said, her voice steady despite her pounding heart. Victor's eyes darted to the documents spread across her desk. In one swift movement, he grabbed a decorative candle and knocked it onto the papers. The flame caught immediately, spreading across the desk. Oops, Victor smirked, backing toward the door. Accidents happen. Lena lunged for the phone as smoke began filling the room, but Victor knocked it from her hand. No one's coming to help. By the time they find you, all that evidence will be ash. He slipped out, locking the door behind him. Lena heard the click of the mechanism as smoke thickened around her. The fire spread rapidly, consuming the documents and blocking her path to the door. Coughing, she dropped to the floor where the air was clearer. Panic threatened to overwhelm her until a memory surfaced. Jack teaching her how to stay calm while working under a truck. Panic makes you miss solutions right in front of you, he'd said. The flash drive still clutched in her hand, Lena crawled toward the windows. Through watering eyes, she spotted the emergency fire hammer mounted on the wall. With desperate strength, she smashed the window, letting in fresh air as alarms finally began blaring throughout the building. As smoke billowed out into the clear sky, Lena thought of Jack rallying his neighbors, standing firm against Daryl's intimidation despite his broken heart. If he could fight for what mattered, so could she. Emergency responders found her minutes later, flash drive still gripped tightly in her hand, determination written across her soot-streaked face. Meanwhile, in Oakport Harbor, Jack stood before a packed community center, surrounded by fellow business owners and residents. "This isn't just about my garage," he told the crowd. "Fletcher's been buying up loans all over town. The marina, the bakery, Sal's Hardware, we're all targets." "For what?" called out Maria from the diner. "A massive tech development," Jack explained, pointing to blueprints he'd obtained from City Hall. "They're trying to force us out one by one." "We can't fight people with that kind of money," someone shouted. Jack thought of Lena, no, Eleanor, and pushed down the ache in his chest. "Maybe not. But we can fight together. They want us divided and desperate. We won't give them that satisfaction." As hands raised in support around him, Jack felt a flicker of hope. He might have lost Lena, but he wouldn't lose his father's legacy without a fight. Next day, Lena sat in the conference room surrounded by stacks of documents and 3 people she trusted implicitly. Marcus, her executive assistant, Diane, the company's general counsel, and Robert, her father's oldest friend and former business partner. "The evidence is overwhelming," Diane said, reviewing the files recovered from Lena's office after the fire. "Victor didn't just forge documents, he created an entire shadow operation within your company. We've identified 7 board members who were actively complicit," Marcus added, sliding a folder across the table. 3 more who looked the other way. Lena nodded, her expression resolute. "I want them all removed, immediately." "The press will have a field day," Robert cautioned. "Let them," Lena replied. "Harman Technologies was built on integrity. My parents would never have tolerated this level of corruption." As her team outlined legal strategies, Lena's mind drifted to Jack's garage. She remembered him explaining his father's business philosophy while they worked side by side. "Dad always said that when you fix someone's car, you're not just fixing metal and rubber, you're fixing their ability to get to work, to visit family, to live their life. That responsibility matters more than profit." "Lena?" Marcus's voice pulled her back to the present. "Sorry," she said. "I was thinking about what really matters." She stood, moving to the whiteboard. "We're not just cleaning house, we're changing direction." She began writing, outlining a new vision for Harman Technologies, one that balanced innovation with community impact, profit with purpose. The values Jack had shown her through his actions shaped every word she wrote. "This is what my parents built," she said finally, "and this is what we're going to rebuild." Robert studied her with newfound respect. "You've changed, Eleanor. She smiled softly. For the better, I hope. 200 miles away, Jack watched helplessly as Daryl Fletcher's men continued dismantling the garage. They'd already removed half the equipment, citing the defaulted loan as legal authority. "You can't take that compressor," Jack protested as two men began disconnecting the air lines. "That's not part of the shop equipment. My father built that himself." "Orders are orders," one worker shrugged, continuing his work. In the commotion, a framed photograph crashed to the floor, the glass shattering across the concrete. Jack lunged forward, pushing past the workers to rescue it. His father smiled up from behind the cracked glass, standing proudly in front of the newly opened garage 30 years earlier. Jack's hands trembled as he carefully removed the glass shards. This was it, the final indignity. His father's legacy reduced to a broken frame and memories. He slumped onto a stack of tires, the photograph clutched in his calloused hands. Despite everything, his thoughts turned to Lena. Not the wealthy CEO he'd discovered her to be, but the woman who had sat beside him on countless evenings, listening to his stories, offering unexpected insights, looking at him with genuine admiration. Had it all been an act, he wondered, tracing his father's face in the photograph. The pain of her deception still cut deep, yet he couldn't reconcile the Lena he knew with the manipulative persona he'd accused her of being. Jack? Mrs. Winters, an elderly customer who'd been coming to the garage for decades, stood in the doorway. "I heard what was happening. I brought you some lunch." She set down a paper bag, then noticed the broken photograph. "Oh, your father's picture. Let me see that. I have frames at home." As she took the photograph, she studied Jack's face. "You look like you've lost more than just the garage." Jack sighed. "I thought I knew someone. Turns out I didn't know her at all." Mrs. Winters settled beside him. "You know, when your father first opened this place, people said he wouldn't last 6 months. He was too honest, they said, too willing to help people who couldn't always pay." She handed the photograph back. "But that's exactly why he succeeded. He judged people by their actions, not their circumstances." She patted his hand. "True character isn't about where you come from, Jack. It's about what you do when it matters." Her words hung in the air as she left. Jack stared at his father's image, remembering Lena's face when she'd helped the elderly customer, her genuine enthusiasm when she'd improved his filing system, her vulnerability the night they'd shared their dreams. Had he judged her too harshly? Had he allowed his own insecurities about wealthy people to blind him to who she truly was? For the first time since discovering her identity, Jack allowed himself to consider that perhaps Lena's feelings and her character had been real all along. The sun hung low in the sky as Lena's rental car skidded to a halt outside Jack's garage. She clutched a folder of documents to her chest, her knuckles white with determination. The past 24 hours had been a blur of legal depositions, financial forensics, and barely contained fury as she'd pieced together the full extent of Victor and Daryl's conspiracy. What she saw as she stepped from the car made her blood run cold. 2 of Daryl's men were wheeling out the diagnostic computer while Jack physically blocked the doorway, preventing them from removing more equipment. "That's enough," Jack shouted, his face flushed with anger. "You've taken everything that was listed in that fraudulent loan document. The rest stays." Daryl Fletcher stood nearby, arms crossed over his chest, a smug smile on his face. "The document says all contents of the premises. That means everything, Rossi." "Jack!" Lena called out, rushing forward. He turned, surprise and confusion crossing his face. "Lena, what are you doing here?" "Stopping this," she said, holding up the folder. "I have proof that this entire takeover is illegal." Daryl laughed, the sound harsh in the tense air. "Look who's back, the secret billionaire. Your boyfriend's garage is done for, sweetheart. No amount of money can change that now." Lena ignored him, turning to Jack. "I don't need my money to fix this. The loan documents Daryl's using? They're fraudulent. I had financial experts review them. Jack's eyes narrowed, not with suspicion of her this time, but with renewed hope. What did they find? Lena opened the folder, pulling out highlighted documents. The interest rates were illegally altered after signing. The terms were changed without notification, and most importantly, she pointed to a specific clause. The collateral terms violate 3 different state regulations. That's ridiculous, Daryl sputtered, but a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. Is it? Lena countered, her voice steady and confident. The voice of a CEO who had just spent days dismantling a corporate conspiracy. Because I also have proof that you and Victor Caldwell conspired to manipulate property values along this waterfront for a development that was never properly approved by Harmon Technologies' board. As if summoned by his name, a sleek black car pulled up, and Victor emerged, his designer suit at odds with the working-class surroundings. "Eleanor," he called, using her formal name like a weapon, "this little crusade of yours is becoming tedious. Whatever you think you found." "I found everything, Victor," Lena interrupted, turning to face him. "The falsified board approvals, the bribery of local officials, the offshore accounts where you've been funneling company funds." Victor's practiced smile faltered. "You can't prove any of that." "Actually, she can." The new voice came from Sheriff Miller, who had pulled up behind Victor's car. "Ms. Harmon forwarded quite the interesting collection of documents to my office this morning. The State Financial Crimes Unit is very interested in speaking with you, Mr. Caldwell." As the sheriff approached Victor, a remarkable thing began to happen. Cars started arriving, old sedans, pickup trucks, minivans, parking haphazardly around the garage. People emerged, faces Jack recognized instantly. Mrs. Winters with her cane, the Gonzalez family whose delivery van Jack had fixed for half price, Coach Taylor whose team bus Jack had repaired the night before a championship game. "What's going on here?" Daryl demanded as the crowd grew. "We heard Jack needed help," Mrs. Winters said simply. "So we came." "You can't intimidate all of us," Coach Taylor added, crossing his arms. The community formed a protective semicircle around Jack and the garage, a human barrier against Daryl's men, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. "This is still a legal repossession," Daryl insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. "No, it's fraud," Lena replied firmly, handing copies of her evidence to Sheriff Miller. "And the courts will agree." Victor, seeing his plan unraveling, made a desperate lunge toward Lena. "You stupid girl. Do you have any idea what I've done to build this deal?" Jack stepped between them instantly, his protective instinct overriding any lingering hurt. But he didn't need to intervene. 2 deputies quickly restrained Victor. "Add assault to the charges," Sheriff Miller said calmly, as Victor was led to a patrol car. Daryl, seeing his partner arrested and facing a crowd of determined townspeople, backed toward his truck. "This isn't over, Rossi." "I think it is," Jack replied. As Daryl and his men retreated, a cheer went up from the gathered crowd. People surged forward, offering to help return equipment, repair damage, or simply provide moral support. In the midst of the celebration, Jack and Lena stood just feet apart, an invisible wall still between them. Their eyes met across the space, so much said in that look, yet so much still unspoken. "Thank you," Jack said finally, his voice rough with emotion. Lena nodded, relief and sadness mingling in her eyes. It was the right thing to do. The immediate threat was gone, but the distance between them remained, a gulf created by secrets and misunderstandings that even this victory couldn't bridge. Not yet. The week after Victor's arrest passed in a blur of activity. Jack's garage slowly came back to life as the community rallied around him. Tools were returned, equipment reinstalled, and the old building hummed once again with the sounds of wrenches turning and engines revving. Jack worked from sunrise to well past sunset, throwing himself into the restoration with single-minded focus. The physical labor helped quiet his troubled thoughts. but couldn't erase the memory of Lena's face when they'd parted after the confrontation. Relief mixed with profound sadness. "That air filter doesn't need that much attention, son," Mrs. Winters observed from her usual chair in the corner of the garage. The elderly woman had appointed herself Jack's unofficial companion during the rebuilding, offering commentary and unsolicited advice in equal measure. Jack realized he'd been cleaning the same part for nearly 10 minutes. Just being thorough. Mrs. Winters hummed skeptically. "And I suppose it's just coincidence that 3 new customers showed up yesterday, mentioning they'd heard about you from a nice young lady staying at the Harborview Cottages." Jack's hands stilled. "She's still in town?" "For the prosecution, they say. Though if you ask me, she's waiting for something else entirely." Mrs. Winters tapped her cane against the concrete floor. "Pride makes for a cold companion, Jack Rossi. Your father knew that." Jack set down his tools, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. "It's not just pride. She lied to me, Mrs. Winters, about everything." "Did she? Seems to me she just didn't tell you who her family was." The old woman's eyes were sharp and knowing. "People have reasons for the walls they build. Your father taught you better than to judge before understanding those reasons." Jack stared out the open garage door toward the harbor. The mysterious deliveries of parts he hadn't ordered but desperately needed, the sudden influx of customers, the anonymous donation to the community legal fund fighting Daryl's development. He wasn't a fool. He knew who was behind it all. "Maybe it's time you heard her side," Mrs. Winters suggested gently. That evening, Jack found himself standing outside Lena's cottage, his heart hammering against his ribs. He raised his hand to knock, then lowered it, then raised it again. The door opened before his knuckles made contact. "Jack," Lena said, surprise and hope flashing across her face. She wore simple jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back. No pretense, no disguise. "I thought I heard someone," she explained, stepping back. "Would you like to come in?" The cottage was modest but comfortable, with papers spread across the small dining table. Legal documents for the case against Victor and Daryl. They stood in awkward silence until both spoke at once. "I'm sorry. I should have." They stopped, and Jack gestured for her to continue. "I should have told you who I was," Lena said, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. "I was running from Victor, from the company, from everything my life had become, but that's no excuse for deceiving you." Jack took a deep breath. "Why did you stay? After your truck was fixed enough to drive, why stay?" "Because for the first time in years I felt real," she answered simply. "With you I wasn't Eleanor Harmon, heiress and CEO. I was just Lena, and that person, she felt more authentic than the woman I'd been pretending to be in boardrooms." Jack moved closer, his anger giving way to understanding. "I built walls too. After years of wealthy developers looking down on this place, on my father's work, I stopped seeing people. I just saw their bank accounts." "We were both hiding," Lena acknowledged. "Me behind a false name, you behind your assumptions." "What happens now?" Jack asked. "You have a company to run." Lena smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "I've restructured Harmon Technologies. New board, new direction. We're focusing on sustainable technology for communities like this one." She hesitated. "I learned that from you, Jack. Your father's approach to business, service first, profit second, it works. It builds something money can't buy." Jack reached for her hand, feeling the softness that now held calluses from her time working in his garage. "I missed you," he admitted, the words carrying the weight of all his hurt and longing. "I missed you too," she whispered, "every day." He pulled her closer, his free hand gently touching her face. "No more walls." "No more walls," Lena agreed, tears shining in her eyes. "Just us. Exactly as we are." When their lips met, it felt like coming home, to a truth that had been waiting for them both all along. 1 month later, The spring sun streamed through the newly installed skylights of Rossi's garage, illuminating the gleaming tools and polished concrete floors. The transformation was subtle but significant, the original character of the place preserved, while modern efficiencies were seamlessly integrated. The scheduling system Lena had implemented now ran on a tablet mounted near the front desk, while Jack's innovative repair techniques were showcased in a small but impressive display area. Jack wiped his hands on a rag as he finished with his last customer of the day, an elderly man whose vintage Cadillac had been brought back to life. "She purrs like new, Mr. Rossi," the man said, pressing a tip into Jack's hand despite his protests. "Your father would be proud of what you've done with this place." As the customer drove away, Jack felt Lena's presence before he saw her. She stood in the doorway, wearing jeans and a simple blouse, her hair catching the late afternoon light. "Ready for our drive?" she asked, a mysterious smile playing at her lips. "Just let me clean up," Jack replied, curiosity piqued by the glint in her eye. When he emerged from washing up, Lena was waiting with a folder in her hands. "Before we go, there's something I want to show you." They sat at his desk as she opened the folder, revealing detailed plans and legal documents. "What's this?" Jack asked, scanning the papers. "A proposal," Lena explained, her voice steady but with an undercurrent of excitement. "A genuine partnership between Rossi's Garage and Harman Technologies. Your mechanical innovations would transform our entire fleet, while this garage remains exactly what your father built, a cornerstone of the community." Jack studied the documents carefully. "This isn't a takeover." "No," Lena said firmly. "It's an equal partnership, in every sense. Your name stays on the building. Your vision drives the mechanical innovations. My resources and network expand your reach." She touched his hand. "Partners, Jack, in business and in life." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "You've thought of everything." "Almost everything," she replied with a mysterious smile. "There's still one more surprise. Follow me." She led him outside to where a vehicle sat covered with a tarp. With theatrical flair, Lena pulled the covering away to reveal a perfectly restored 1967 Ford pickup, his father's truck, which had been sold years ago to cover medical bills. Jack froze, his hand moving to his mouth. "How did you—" "I tracked it down in Arizona," Lena explained, watching his reaction with shining eyes. "The restoration team worked around the clock. Everything's original. Even the radio your dad installed." Jack ran his hand along the fender, emotion making his throat tight. The truck was exactly as he remembered. The deep blue paint, the chrome accents, even the small dent in the passenger door from when he'd first learned to ride a bike. "This isn't just about business for me, Jack," Lena said softly. "This is about honoring what matters to you. What made you the man I fell in love with?" Jack pulled her into his arms, his kiss conveying everything words couldn't. "Let's take a drive," he suggested when they finally broke apart. As they traveled along the coastal road, Jack behind the wheel of his father's truck and Lena beside him, the conversation flowed easily between them. Dreams for the garage, plans for Harman Technologies' new direction, possibilities for their shared future. Jack steered the truck onto the overlook where they'd first pointed out constellations together. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "Remember this spot?" he asked, reaching for her hand. "Our first real conversation," Lena nodded. "You showed me Orion." Jack smiled, reaching into his pocket. "Seems like the right place to start our next chapter. If you enjoyed this story, I found another special one just for you. Our community can't stop talking about how heartwarming and moving it is. Click on the video in front of you to experience this beautiful story before it's gone.